everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you for coming out to the event tonight at the Boulder bookstore. It's with your help and support we've been your community bookstore for over 40 years. If you haven't yet purchased a copy of the Plastic Purge, we have plenty at the register behind us. You can get one signed after the event and pay for it on your way out. We offer parking validation for anyone that makes a purchase, and I'd like to remind everyone that Readers Guild members can reserve a seat at any in-store event. At this time, please take a moment to turn off all cell phones and electronics. And while you do that, a little bit about Michael. Mike SanClements has a PhD in ecology and is a staff scientist at the National Ecological Observatory Network, an affiliate of the University of Colorado Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research. It's a mouthful.
You got it. You did well.
Although Mike grew up in Massachusetts, he has always felt more at home in the Mountain West, surrounded by the open space he loves. He also specifically asked me to mention that he has a super cute daughter named Hadley who's sitting over here. And she really is super cute. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Mike SanClements.
Thanks, everyone. Can you guys all hear me? Kate, can you hear me? You were late. I'm just kidding. Thanks so much to everyone for coming. This is really fun. And I wanted to say thanks to my sister. She flew out and surprised me today, but I totally ruined it by going home for lunch and catching her, which I don't normally do. And then my best and oldest friend, Ivor Ernegaard, is over here too, so that's great. And Hadley and Mary. Yeah, he's crying now. So I figured I'd do a little bit of reading from a few sections of the book and just kind of talk about a little bit of each section, maybe like 4 or 5 sections, not too much reading, and just touch on a few subjects that I think are important. And I didn't really know what I was going to do, so I was watching YouTube videos of other authors reading, and I realized that they all had paper, not their book, and paper, and then I realized I don't even have a copy of my book that's not the book, so I couldn't get paper, so I brought the book. But anyway, so I'll just start by reading. Beginning of the book. Humanity's plastic footprint is probably more dangerous than its carbon footprint, said Captain Charles Moore, the man who discovered the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 1997. Okay, well maybe he was wrong, but his first statement still has something to teach us. See, there's clearly enough plastic in the middle of the ocean to freak Captain Charles right out. And second, it's illustrative of our ability to let massive global problems like oceans filling up with plastic debris, or climate change, the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced, dissolve into the background noise of our day-to-day lives. I mean, truly, how many of us can say we've ever given real thought to something as pervasive in modern life as plastic? Probably not very many. Until recently, that included me too. Yep, I admit until the last couple of years, I too hadn't given a tremendous amount of thought to societies and even my own plastic consumption. But now, well, I can't help but see it everywhere. And since I'm in confession mode here, truth be told, I never intended to learn this much about plastic, and I certainly never intended to write a book about it. I'm writing this book largely as a result of a conversation I had in 2011 with some of the good folks at grist.org, an informative and snarky environmental online publication. During that fateful conversation, I agreed to attempt to live without creating any plastic waste for 2 weeks. Prior to that, I'd never even considered such a thing. Even though I'm an environmental scientist, such a possibility had never crossed my mind. At the time, my comprehension of plastics and the degree to which they have infiltrated and affect our lives can be described only as incredibly shallow. Looking back now, I'm blown away that the fact that our society is super plasticized wasn't completely obvious to me. But once someone points it out to you, it becomes impossible to ignore. However, until that happens, it somehow manages to stay hidden without trying to hide. How does the saying go? The best place to hide something is out in plain sight. And that's precisely what plastic does. It hides out right out in the open in front of us, getting into everything but rarely being noticed. Perhaps we can't see it anymore because it's always been a part of our lives, so we've just come to take it for granted. And so I think there's a lot of truth to that. You don't really see plastic, because it's everywhere. And when I say our lives, I mean our lives, because when I started thinking about this book and researching it, I came to the conclusion that my grandmother, who's 95, didn't grow up with any plastic. So, sometime in between my grandmother's life and my life, we've gone from there being no plastic in people's lives to it being absolutely everywhere. So I started thinking a lot about, writing this book, researching this book, how did that happen? What happened to make that come to be? And so it's such a big topic that I started thinking about the book and how do I organize a book about plastic. So what I decided to do is I'd kind of try to answer that question of how we got to the place where we are. So the book starts out addressing the history of plastic and talks about how we really came to this point. And that's actually really interesting because plastic sort of was invented because it was basically invented because this billiard company in New York offered a $10,000 prize for anyone who could come up with a replacement for ivory and billiard balls. So that's really where synthetic plastic came from. So it's kind of really bizarre that it came from almost a conservation effort. I don't know if the conservation was really the driver, but plastics obviously causes environmental problems. So it's pretty interesting that it came from that type of thing. So, and then I started thinking more about how I had to organize this book. So I go through the entire history of plastic, kind of try to answer that question of how we got here. And then I also started to think about the different types of plastic that we now have in our lives and sort of what those look like. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted to read just a little bit more from the introduction. So I'm skipping forward now. It hasn't always been this way. Your great-grandparents didn't bring produce home from the store in plastic bags or keep leftovers in Tupperware. But today we are producing nearly 300 million metric tons of plastic globally each year, only about 10% of which is recycled. So what gives? How did we go from no plastic to being so inundated with this stuff that we literally cannot escape it? As I said earlier, in the summer of 2011, my partner Mary and I tried to purchase no plastic and create no plastic waste for 2 weeks. When I blogged about it on grist.com, a great environmental site, blah, 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 skipping my own words here, readers were hungry for information and wrote about the ways that our experiment inspired them to cut back on plastic and even crowdsource great tips. But here's what else surprised me. In those 2 weeks, Mary and I felt healthier. We couldn't really eat junk food since all of it is packaged in plastic, and we both lost weight. We were already pretty healthy eaters before, but we both lost a few additional pounds as a result of attempting to cut out plastic. We had less stuff around the house and fridge, which also made us feel more organized and sane. It felt good to know we weren't sending crap into landfills or putting chemicals like BPA and phthalates into our bloodstreams. More on those later. Turns out, cutting back on plastic simultaneously worked to help us lead healthier lives. For the record, it's not possible to totally eliminate plastic from your life, and that isn't what this book is proposing. In fact, we failed during our 2 weeks. This book will instead show you how to reduce the waste and health risks from plastic in your life while still using some plastic, and that which can be incredibly useful. Wait, you say, risks? What risks? I'm hardly about to get tangled up in a six-pack ring and drown. Can something we use so regularly really be so bad? Plus, I really like my smartphone and my computer, and frankly, Tupperware is pretty handy. So I'm just going to go ahead and toss my plastic bottle in the recycle bin, and problem solved. Oh, how I wish it were that easy, but alas, it's not. The story of plastic in our lives is far more complicated than simply using it, recycling it, and calling good. As a matter of fact, the more I've looked into it, the more stunned I've become by what I've found. When you start to dig into the effects of our plastic consumption, they go far beyond the obvious and visible. There are environmental and health-related effects that you've never considered, and there's plastic in places you've never expected to be. For instance, did you know that a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association demonstrated that after eating soup from a can, the toxic chemical bisphenol A, commonly referred to as BPA, was found to be readily detectable in urine. And by readily detectable, I mean, quote, among the most extreme reported in a non-occupational setting. Now, you may be wondering why I'm talking about BPA, a common ingredient in plastics, when you thought I was talking about canned soup. That's because most canned soup foods are lined with plastic. Surprised? Yeah, I was too. BPA levels in urine were recently linked to obesity in a study published by the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. The study concluded that BPA was positively associated with generalized obesity, abdominal obesity, insulin resistance, and those over 40 years of age. Phthalates are another common class of chemicals found in plastics that have been linked to a host of health problems, particularly reproductive ones, including earlier breast development and possible increased breast cancer risk in females, reduced sperm count in males, and increased genital abnormalities in boys born to mothers with high exposure to phthalates. Yikes. But BPA and phthalates are just the beginning. Unfortunately, there's a lot we just don't know about plastic. Scientists really don't have a handle on what exposure levels of these chemicals are toxic, meaning they don't know how much is too much. Many of you have probably seen BPA-free products like water bottles, but what does BPA-free really mean?
You got a ton of great information, but you're reading so fast.
Can you guys, should I slow down?
Yeah, just
Well,
yeah,
seriously,
Okay.
as an English teacher, if you were in my class,
Would I be in trouble?
I would tell you that you have so much interesting material.
Okay.
Why don't you tell us about it and just select a few parts and just read slowly so maybe we can absorb it.
Okay.
Thank
Sounds
you.
like it's
You're
a great start.
wonderful. You have all this potential, so don't read so fast. Thank you.
I'm a really fast reader, and I don't usually read out loud to people. So should I start? But thanks for the tip. I'll slow down. Ready? But BPA and phthalates are just the beginning. Unfortunately, there's a lot we just don't know about plastic. Scientists really don't have a handle on what exposure levels of these chemicals are toxic, meaning they don't know how much is too much. Many of you have probably seen BPA-free products like water bottles, but what does BPA-free really mean? And that's a good question. Some evidence suggests that BPA substitutes like BPS may be even more dangerous. Is this better?
Oh, this
BPS isn't the only substitute with dubious characteristics. As the New York Times reports, bisphenol B and bisphenol F are other variants used instead of BPA in various products. In the limited testing done on those chemicals in other countries, scientists found bisphenol B to be more potent than BPA in stimulating breast cancer cells. And this isn't the only instance where the unknown might be worse than the known. So, I'm still laughing about the English teacher comment. It's awesome. If you think about a little bit of what I said, if you caught some of it, I talked about sort of recycling, I talked about history, I talked about chemicals, I talked about disposable single-use plastics. And so in learning about plastic, I kind of came to see plastic as having three types of plastic: good, bad, and ugly. And so the good plastic is the plastic that, you know, makes our modern lifestyle possible. And we all should be thankful for plastic. Like, you know, you're videotaping this on a camera, we all use cell phones, there's medical equipment. And then there's you know, the bad plastic. When I think of bad plastic, I think of things that aren't necessarily single-use plastic, but they're the type of plastic that leaches those chemicals into our bodies and causes problems for us and the generations below us. So more the toxic plastics. And then I think of the ugly plastics as the single-use plastics that we just toss. The things that you hold in your hand for a few seconds, like that classic plastic bag, or the water bottle that you just throw away or it doesn't get recycled. So I sort of came to see plastic as being good, bad, and ugly. And so I think what I wanted to do then was, once I recognized sort of what these types of plastic were in our lives, how I might sort of organize these books and talk about each one of these types of plastic, point out where they are, and then in the last section of the book, I highlight how we can get rid of the bad in plastics and the single-use ugly plastics from our lives. And I go through many of the things that we come into contact with. So I thought I'd maybe just read very briefly from each of the sections: the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'll read it slower. So the good, benefits of plastic. It's important to think about the big picture. It's also important to examine environmental and social problems within the context of reality and to search for feasible solutions. In researching this book, I came across an article titled 10 Things We Wish Had Never Been Invented. And guess what number one was? Plastic. Look, I'll be the first one to admit that plastic causes a lot of problems on this planet and that our addiction to it is way out of control, but you'll never catch me saying I wish plastic had never been invented. Frankly, that's just silly. I'm not going to belabor this point, but I'd like to spend a little time reflecting upon the amazing role plastic plays in our lives and the way it positively impacts every one of us every day. Realizing the ways in which plastic benefits our lives can occur on two levels: superficially and comprehensively. On the superficial side, it's easy to recognize some of the benefits of plastics. Plastics that make many, if not most, technological advances possible, like the plastics that makes up your cell phone or your computer, are obviously a huge benefit to our society. Plastic quite literally saves lives too. A lot of modern medical and scientific equipment and supplies are made from plastic, and while some of these items certainly have their shortcomings, for example, phthalates may be leaching from PVC IV bags into the bloodstream of patients, those IV drips have still saved a whole lot of lives. And it's not just IV bags that are manufactured from plastic. There are countless other items like plastic syringes, medical gloves, and other critical components of medical equipment, not to mention two other big pieces of life-saving plastic equipment, the defibrillator and MRI, which brings me to the next point. Science, as we currently know it, could not exist or continue to advance along these same lines without the assistance of plastic. Plastic is absolutely critical to our modern existence. And so I think that what I'm getting at here is that when we live in a world that we have, like a lot of people, and fewer resources, we have to be cognizant of how we choose to allocate those resources. So I think it's important that we recognize that, you know, plastic takes oil to make it, and it takes a lot of resources and creates a lot of waste. So how can we elect to allocate our plastic use to the things that better society and eliminate it from the parts where we don't need it? And so that's sort of one of the things I hope this book can really push for. And so one of the types of plastic that is bad is the ugly plastic, and that's the single-use stuff. And then there's also the bad plastic, which is the toxins in plastic. And the toxins in plastic are really scary because we don't really know that much about them. And so I think I just want to read a little bit about the bad plastic. And there's this really great quote from Brian Walsh in Time magazine, and he said, quote, "If you don't have BPA in your body, you're not living in the modern world," which is a pretty telling quote. And actually, over 90% of all of us have BPA in our bloodstreams right now. So I just want to read a little bit about the bad. Plastic can be a human health hazard. Not all plastics, but some, depending on the type or RISS number. And the risk number is that number that you see inside of all plastics, like the 7 or the 1 or the 2 that's in the little recycling sign. And just because it's in a recycling sign doesn't mean it can be recycled. That's actually very misleading. Not all plastics can be recycled. So, and there's a table in here that goes through all those plastics for you. But depending on the type or RIS number of plastics you're dealing with, you can be exposed to a range of toxins via different potential pathways. My hope in this chapter is to familiarize you with the known toxins plastic contains and some of the pathways through which they can enter your body, so the next time you go shopping, you can make some wiser consumer choices when it comes to your health. It's infuriating and terrifying how many perfectly legal products in our society are potential carcinogens or endocrine disruptors. And endocrine disruptors are things that mimic hormones. So they act like hormones in our bodies, and that's what the chemicals, and like BPA and phthalates are. Some of them are more obvious than others. For instance, it's rather easy to see why eating fast food 3 meals a day might be bad for you, or why smoking is a terrible idea. But the health risks from plastics fly a little more under the radar. Perhaps this is why because we don't actively consume plastics. I mean, when was the last time you finished a bottle of water and then ate the bottle? The funny thing is, that is sort of what you're doing when you polish off a bottle of water. Plastics have the potential to leach toxins into your food and drink, and can even emit them into the air. Once in your food or drink or there, they have an easy pathway for entering your body, a really scary thought. To help you keep those unwanted chemicals out of your body, here's some information about the toxins that are commonly found in plastic and the potential harm they can cause to your health. So in this section, I spent a lot of time thinking about and researching those phthalates and those chemicals, because there's totally misconstrued research. If you look at the research that's done by companies, plastic's fine. And if you look at research that's done by independent scientists, those chemicals tend to be pretty toxic. And the FDA stance on it is sort of, we're not really sure. So they just kind of step back from it. But basically 95% or so of the research that's not funded by industry suggests that these things are bad for you at very low levels. And so I spent a lot of time in here talking about the household products that really emit these toxins into us and how we avoid them and what those effects are. And some of them are really scary, and they're really scary for children, because children and pregnant women are the ones that really suffer from these things, or where the things are really seen. So you guys can ask more questions about that. But then I just want to talk a little bit about the ugly too. So then I have a section on the ugly, and the ugly really focuses on the environmental cost of like our plastic addiction, as I think of it, because that's where we see, things like plastic bags and streams and bottles and all the plastic waste we see littering the world all the day. So just read a little bit from that. When thinking about or discussing environmental issues, I think it's important to remember that they are not separate from social and economic issues. Our culture relies directly on the ecosystem services provided by the environment to sustain our lives and the economy. Therefore, environmental degradation often has direct economic and human health costs associated with it. Environmental degradation caused by plastics is no exception. While some economic and human health impacts are quantifiable, i.e. they can be transferred in numbers such as a monetary value or a number of illnesses, sometimes less quantifiable things like aesthetics are important too. It's tough to assign a cost to the knowledge that sea turtles exist, right? It's equally tough to assign a cost to beautiful fall foliage, but we all know that these things have value in some way. The aesthetics of a nice, clean living space has value, as do clean beaches, rivers, and parks. How many of you have been on a walk and seen a plastic bag in a tree, or half buried in mud along the river, or have driven down a road with a bunch of gross plastic litter along the shoulder? All of you, I'm sure. Well, we all see these types of things all the time, and it's easy to become desensitized to them. But that doesn't mean that we should stop trying to prevent them. Many of us don't accept these things in our own individual yards, so collectively we must make an effort to not accept them anywhere. And it's important to remember that the damage from plastic waste is far more than just aesthetic. It leads to very real and very serious problems. While it's easy enough to see plastic litter in the streets, parks, or even wildlands of the United States, the epidemic becomes far more apparent in developing nations. Traveling abroad in Cambodia, Egypt, and Peru, I was blown away by the amount of plastic waste that littered nearly every patch of land I set foot on. I fully recognize that not every country has or can afford to have a well-developed or even any public waste infrastructure, and as a result, the amount of litter that piles up can be truly astonishing. In developing cities and nations, the lack of sanitation service means most plastic bags waste ends up in the street, and all those bags choke storm canals, cover drains, and clog pipes so that water doesn't get where it needs to go and can cause floods. I've seen it myself in Cambodia, where heavy rains turn the streets into a knee-deep plastic soup in a matter of minutes. This poses problems on a number of levels, some of which have very destructive consequences. The amount of plastic waste became so severe in Mumbai, India in 2005 that it choked the city's drainage system and resulted in severe flooding that caused deaths of over 1,000 people. Plastic bags have been implicated in several major flooding events in Bangladesh during the late 1980s as well. By banning bags, these municipalities hope to prevent and have prevented such future flooding, or at least begun to mitigate it. And so this is just one little example, and I think we all have been probably watching the disappearance of Malaysian Flight 370, and so there's been a lot in the news about how one of the things that's been confounding their search for it is the amount of plastic waste in the oceans. And there really is just so much plastic waste in the oceans, and the effects of go on, and there's some interesting things here I talked about in here, like the number of cattle that die every year and that result in further hunger issues just from eating plastic waste is crazy in developing nations, and then the economic and costs of tourism and all these things. So, and sea turtles, they eat a lot of plastic bags. So yeah, the environmental costs of plastic are very, very real. So after going through and I spent a bit of time talking about all these things, I tried to get into a prescriptive part of the book, and sort of, rather than just say like, well, here's all this stuff, you're screwed. I tried to walk us through and talk about things we can do. So I'm going to read just a little bit from the prescriptive part, and I run through like all of the things we do. Like there's a big section on food and grocery shopping and hygiene and homes, and so I'm going to read just the beginning of the section on plastic and children.
Would you be good to give us a page number for what you're reading?
Yeah, totally.
Thank you.
173.
Thank you.
So this is plastic and your children. Chapter 16. So now that we've covered sex toys, the next logical, see, don't you guys want to read about that? See, that's good, right? The next logical step seems to be babies. Babies are tiny and cute. They are also innocent, vulnerable, and incapable of making their own decisions. As parents, grandparents, aunts, or uncles, we owe it to them to make the most informed decisions possible on their behalf. This includes decisions about plastics, because a lot of baby products are plastic, a real lot. Some of these products are not designed to go in babies' mouths, and some are not. But I'm not so sure that matters, because most kids put everything in their mouth anyway. A lot of plastic baby products are disposable throwaway crap, designed with a short product lifespan in mind. With all that plastic in bottles, toys, and pacifiers, we should ask the question, can these things harm our children? And what are the costs to our environment? If they do contain toxins, can we mitigate the risk to our kids while lessening the environmental impacts? Of course we can. The remainder of this chapter includes information on common plastic baby products, the problems they present, and some solutions and better options for each. Generally speaking, though, the best way to cut your baby's footprint, plastic and otherwise, is to purchase or use secondhand baby stuff. Not only will you save money, and lots of it, but I believe you'll also find buying secondhand likely won't limit your options very much because there's so much baby stuff on Craigslist. Some people worry about secondhand baby items exposing their children to germs, but keep in mind that while it seems somewhat counterintuitive, exposing your children to germs at an early age will actually make them healthier in the long run. And just so you know that I'm invested in this section, our daughter will be roughly 6 months old when this book comes out, and she's actually 5. I suck at math. 5 months. So I spent a lot of time in this section just talking about, there's a lot of, kind of interesting things. You think about BPA is banned in baby bottles in the United States, but you think about what I said at the beginning, well, what is the replacement for BPA in those bottles, and what does that mean? So, pacifiers, BPA is not banned in pacifiers. The amount of phthalates in BPA is limited, but so what does that mean, and how much is there, and what options are there? And so all these types of things, and are plastic diapers bad for babies? Does chlorinated plastics, so just this section I really tried to also just lay it out, and that's sort of what I did for all these things. Yeah, and so I wanted to read you guys what I thought was probably one of the most interesting things, and then I'll wrap up and you guys can ask questions. But so, not technically plastic, receipts, the single biggest path to BPA exposure. Cash register receipts aren't technically plastic, but I'm going to talk about them here anyway. I feel compelled to bring them up because receipts are a great avenue for getting BPA into your body, much like plastics. A study found shocking results when examining cash register receipts. The leader of the study, John Warner, a former professor at the University of Massachusetts and founder of the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry, makes a critical point. When people talk about polycarbonate bottles, that's like your hard water bottle, like your Nalgene, they talk about nanogram quantities of BPA leaching out, Warner observes. The average cash register receipt that's out there and uses the BPA technology will have 60 to 100 milligrams of free BPA. And just to clarify, 1 milligram equals 1 million nanograms. So we're talking orders of magnitude more BPA in a receipt than any of the things we worry about drinking. And unfortunately, receipt paper doesn't need to be consumed to transfer BPA to your body. Rather, the BPA in thermal receipt paper is loosely bound to the paper itself and easily transferred to your skin and directly into your body. So very much so, one study confirmed that out of 400 pregnant women in Ohio, the highest BPA levels were found in cashiers who had almost 20% higher concentrations of BPA in their urine than other pregnant women. Another study found that the total mass of BPA in a receipt is 250 to 1,000 times greater than the amount of BPA typically found in a can of food or a can of baby formula. So that's a pretty crazy fact. So when you buy a book tonight, if you do, don't ask for a receipt. But I think that's a pretty crazy fact. And there's a lot of just things about plastic like that. You just don't really think about it. So I think it's pretty interesting. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. So I think maybe I'll just read you guys my conclusions and then I'll stop talking. So what did I learn overall from this book? I mentioned at the very beginning of this book that I thought of plastics as an invasive species, or at least exhibiting similar characteristics. Now, a year later, having spent nearly every second of my free time reading and writing about plastic, I still believe that to be true. But I've come to another conclusion as well, and this is a really profound conclusion. Plastic is your frenemy, or an enemy who acts like a friend. Plastic most certainly meets those criteria. In so many instances, plastic acts like a friend, yet at the same time, despite my best efforts, my body probably contains BPA because of all my exposure to it. Even more disconcerting, that BPA might be in Mary's body right now, and how might it be affecting our unborn child? Frenemy indeed. The Urban Dictionary definition for frenemy is actually quite long and contains some other valuable insights that might be useful in guiding your future relationship with plastic. For instance, quote, "These relationships are worth doing a cost-benefit analysis on. Also, limiting relationships with frenemies is a must. I couldn't have said it better if I tried. When it comes to plastic, we should all be thankful for the hundreds of positive ways it affects our lives every day, making possible the medical advances that cure us when we are ill, the transportation that lets us see our amazing planet, and the technology that keeps us in touch with friends and family over great distances. But in many instances, and there are oh so many, the costs outweigh the benefits. These are the times we need to distance ourselves from plastic. My hope is that this book opened your eyes and provided you the knowledge to protect yourselves and your loved ones from the potentially harmful chemicals lurking in plastics everywhere. At the same time, I hope that you'll find ways to eat a bit healthier, create less waste, and make wiser choices about the plastics in your life." So you guys can ask questions now.
This is more probably practical, but when you go to the store and you buy yogurt in plastic containers, or your spinach is in or lettuce is in a plastic container, you just come home and put it into a different
Yeah, so like,
container, or-
yeah, so she's asking, when you go to the store and you buy yogurt in a plastic container or lettuce in a plastic container, do you come home and put it in a different container? And so I think there's sometimes where, one thing that's kind of funny about like produce shopping is that we all are sort of trained to like put our produce in a bag, but there's really no reason you need to put like a freaking potato in a bag. Like, you can just put it in the basket, right? So like, I tend to do that now. Or like a head of lettuce, you can just put it in the basket. Like, you know, and you can buy cloth produce bags too. And you're gonna wanna like transfer it to something else because it sucks the moisture right out of it and they will really fast in the fridge. You know, and sometimes there are things like yogurt where you just get it in plastic. So, you know, I mean, you could transfer it to something if you wanted. It depends on the type of plastic too. So there's some yogurt like Stony Brook comes in sort of in a bioplastic that's healthier for you. So if that's that, I'll just leave it in there.
One yogurt glass jar, the Bulgarian.
Yeah, yep. So there's options. Yeah, it's very and so one thing that's tricky is, and I tried to do in here is so then the whole prescriptive section, like I like laid out each thing, and I put a number of plastic bottles next to like different options by how difficult they are and like what a pain they are. So you can kind of like browse the book and decide how much of an effort you want to put into doing things. Yeah. Ooh, Angie, Dave. I don't know who. Okay, Dave.
My question was about the lifespan of some of these chemicals. Did you find anything in the research about that? Like how long they live in your body?
So you metabolize most of these pretty quickly, but we're constantly metabolizing them. And with these chemicals, it's really not known, like with these endocrine disruptors, what the amount that's necessary to cause changes are. And it's thought to be very, very, very low. So even though we're metabolizing these, you know, most likely it's bad for you. And like most research suggests it is. So the lifespan is actually pretty short, but it's thought that because we're constantly metabolizing them, that's where the problem comes in. Angie. Oh, yeah. So I totally fell backwards into this. I was so lucky. I wanted to like write. I like writing, and I wanted to like get a little more. So you know, my job is like peer-reviewed science and stuff like that. And I wanted to do something that was a little more like popular science. I'd just been interested in that, and so I responded to a call from Grist to do like propose an eco dare, like something for them to like write about it and raise awareness of the topic and raise money. And so we talked about it and came up with this idea of like plastic and doing this over 2 weeks. And I was writing these blog posts, and Jasmine Faustino, who was an editor at St. Martin's Press, was reading them, and she called me and she was like, "These are really great. You should submit a book proposal. Here's an agent." And I was like, "Okay." So I totally fell into it. Like, yeah, it was just lucky. Yeah, yeah. Kendra, then Mo.
Have you experienced any pushback from any lobbying or plastic lobbying?
Oh yeah, so not really actually, but what was really cool was there's a post by like the Plastic Society, and they were like actually like kind of almost complimented me for saying that plastic was also amazing. They didn't give me that much crap. So I wrote an op-ed in the Daily Camera about the bag ban, suggesting, or not the tax, and I got like Oh my gosh, the comments were amazing. People were so mad at me. But yeah, so not too much. Maybe I'll get more though. I guess that's when I know my book's like doing good, right? Mo?
What's the best way to get rid of ugly plastic that you have in your daily life? Is it cutting it up into really small pieces? There's times where you get the ugly plastic and I kind of feel like no one really wants to do it.
Yeah, so, I mean, we have a, you mean as far as like recycling it or getting rid of it if you're forced?
Like so that a turtle doesn't choke on it in the ocean.
Yeah, so it's tricky, right? I mean, we're fortunate in Boulder to have very great single stream recycling, but we can't recycle like a lot of the products. It's really funny, like Whole Foods sells a lot of their plastic is number 5 plastic, which our single stream recycling can't take. So if you look at like a lot of the plastic you get around your house, it tends to be number 5. And you also can't put plastic bags in like our single stream, but Whole Foods will take all that stuff at their store. You can just drop it off outside of like Ideal Market or something, so that's nice. As far as, I guess as far as being an individual consumer, the best you can do is get it to that receptacle, and then it's sort of out of your hands, right? I mean, I don't know beyond that. Like cutting up 6-pack rings is something you can do, but I don't know, once you've turned it over and treated it the most responsibly you can, I don't know what more you can really do. Phil?
There's sort of like a major movement towards the production of it, because there's like 100 people here maybe, and it's like, I pick up like 40 bags of cut up plastic today.
Yeah.
I do it all the time. It's like, yeah, it's just never ends. So how do we stop it before, at the root of the evil?
Yeah.
Before it gets to everywhere?
So that's an interesting question, and I think some of that is driven by, so like, that's sort of driven by consumer preference to a degree, right? Like if consumers push enough for having more options, that require less packaging, I think we can maybe get there. And I think that it's also cheaper for, companies to use less packaging, costs them less money. And that's why Costco and some of those places are actually able to sell things so cheaply, because they actually invest less money in packaging. So I think, the BPA, if you look at the BPA legislation for baby bottles, the FDA only did that after all the companies moved to having BPA-free baby bottles anyway, because consumers demanded it. So I think that, there's always that push for consumers to sort of make that change, and I think those things are really incremental and takes a long time. But if you think about the way bag taxes are becoming more popular in San Francisco now, banning bottled water at city events, et cetera, I mean, I think, if you talk about things, eventually things can change. I guess that's my take on it. I don't know what else. I mean, you could get on the board of like the Plastic Society of Engineers or something. Yeah. Yeah.
What about all the recycled plastic bags and things that you buy that says, 1 billion plastic bottles went into this grocery bag? Does that inhibit the BPA in it at all, or is it just all the same?
So,
just ground up and put back into the next thing?
so the plastic water bottles you typically buy, like a single-use like water bottle, are typically plastic number 1, which is actually a pretty safe plastic. It's more plastic number 7 that is the BPA issue, and plastic number 7 is weird because plastic number 7 is any plastic that was invented after 1988. They're like, we already have this system, so we're just going to lump everything else that gets invented into this number 7. So you don't really know it, and there's hundreds of types of plastic in there. But like those big water coolers are always plastic number 7 that you like the bubblers. So water sits in there for a really long time and can collect BPA. So those are actually not that great for you. But the disposable plastics, like the single-use water bottle, from an ingesting of BPA stance isn't that bad. But there's actually a lot of great products that are made from those. Like Patagonia makes all their fleece jackets from those, and a lot of, backpack, like I think Mountain Smith makes their backpacks from those and stuff like that. So like there's a lot of great things you can make from plastic bottles.
So, but the recycled product is as safe or less safe or the same?
I think it would depend on the instance, the type of plastic you started with and the instance. And that's what's tricky about plastic, is there's the 7 types of plastic, but number 7 contains so many types of plastic. So there's a table in here that walks you through each one of those types and sort of what products you're most likely to find those in, and whether or not they're the type of plastics that are likely to leach things into your body or not, and how easily recycled they are. Chris. Yeah, this is my landlord, Chris.
You study how it gets
How it gets into what?
how it gets into our food. And the obvious stuff is plastics in the ocean, fish with plastics, and food chain like that. But what about like chicken feed and just kind of stuff that you wouldn't think of?
Yeah, so I didn't get too much into the chicken feed thing. I think or that type of thing, but I talk about like migrating plastic, the chemicals up the food chain is a thing, like the microbeads and, microbeads and with the Great Lakes and everything, fish consume a lot of that and that can transfer up to us. They're like the really tiny little beads that are come in a lot of facial scrubs and things like that are supposed to, or even toothpastes, they're designed to go down the drain. And they're designed to like exfoliate skin or scrub plaque off your teeth, but they're actually plastic. And so the fish consume those, and yeah, yeah.
Do you think that's all in the ingredients of those products? Because they're clever about hiding.
Yeah, they hide a lot of things. So I think I just try not to get things that have exfoliating. If you Google it, you can find a list now of things like that.
So basically, if you use an exfoliant, then those are little great beads of
They
plastic.
tend to be, yeah.
So get rid of anything like that.
Yeah, fortunately I don't use those fancy products.
Yeah, there's the next good question. How do you dispose of it well, safely? What's the least undesirable, what's the least
Depends what it
harmful
is.
way?
Yeah, I mean, you have to dispose of it somehow, so it depends what it is. I mean, if it's toothpaste you don't want, I guess you could, I don't know, right? You might at some point. A lot of companies are starting to pull them out. There's a big push when this first came out, some studies about the Great Lakes and how inundated they were. So, but back to your question too, is like microwaving foods and plastics. You see people doing that a lot. That's, I mean, that always makes me cringe a little bit. So things like that, yeah.
Okay, I just love my plastic containers. I freeze blueberries and everything in the summer, and you know, I don't reheat in the microwave in plastic, but you know, Tupperware and quality plastic containers. I mean, do I need to go through my cupboard and get rid of all of them, or how can I?
Well, we already have them. I wouldn't get rid of them. I just wouldn't microwave stuff in them. We freeze all our stuff in like mason jars, which works pretty good. If you just leave room, they won't break. They'll just freeze up.
Oh, God.
But Tupperware is fine. Just don't microwave your stuff in it. If you already have it, throwing it away and buying something else isn't.
Well, I don't have very much Tupperware, but I have some quality plastic that's expensive to buy.
Then keep it.
They're great containers.
You already got it. Just don't microwave your blueberries. Hank?
What's the risk of PVC in water? Because especially in developing countries, so much of the water is transported into PVC.
Yeah, PVC is not so great for water and for you. PVC has a lot of phthalates in it. It's one of the more toxic plastics, and a lot of like kids things are made with PVC. You don't. PVC pipes aren't high risk. PVC is not the greatest. Lindsay.
How common is it for the FDA to regulate things that aren't really intended to be considered in the first place? I mean, is this something that they're going to become more involved in regulating?
Sheesh, I don't know. It's tough to say if they'll become more involved and regulate it. They kind of have a blasé stance on it right now. You know, so I think that. I mean, it's tough to say if they'll become more involved. I don't know the answer. Other countries have started to regulate these things. I mean, the FDA does regulate phthalates a little more in some things, like in pacifiers and stuff are regulated for babies. But as far as BPA, there's a little less regulation. But they did the BPA in baby bottles is now legislation. So I think these things do happen. I just think it takes time, right? And this is all a fairly new topic in a way. So we're just learning about it.
As a cashier, what can I do to keep myself safe?
So there are a couple companies now that are starting to make BPA-free receipt paper. So you could beg the Boulder bookstore to start using it. Or you could wear gloves, I guess. That's kind of, you could wear mittens. That'll make your job more difficult. But you should ask if you guys can start using it. Yeah.
When you look at any kind of social media, I'm sure we've all seen the concern with plastic water bottles left in the sunlight in our vehicles. If you're going to drink a pot of water that's been exposed to any kind of sunlight, you'll be dead the next week, basically, whatever. What are your thoughts on how what kind of treachery is involved with simple commercial water bottles.
I don't think you'll be dead in the next week.
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding. No, I know.
That'll be slow.
I guess my take on it personally now is like, after reading all this and kind of sussing out what I think is, I just try to avoid it. I mean, we don't know how bad it is for you. We know that there are bad effects, like there are effects that are bad for you. So I can.
A lot of stuff that's written out there implies that there's already been some foundation established. Would you disagree that we really know anything foundational about how bad it is? I mean,
I think we know that these endocrine disruptors are starting to have effects on human health. Yes, I think we can say that. And so my take on it is, I have a hard time sometimes reading about health studies because there's so many, there's so many things that could contribute to it. Like, how do you isolate things? So sometimes I feel like I always treat them sort of like caution. That's how I approached this whole thing, and I didn't want to be like too alarmist, right? So I think my take is that if I can get a stainless steel water bottle and just avoid that, I'll just get a stainless steel water bottle and avoid that. I mean, we all know, have parents who grew up, having plastic. Like, I grew up in the 70s. Like, I had plastic. Actually, I had glass baby bottles, though. My mom did say that. But, so I just rather, if I don't have to take on the risk, I'll avoid the risk. I guess that's my take on it. Russ. Then Ella.
So who thought of that question to bottles left in the sun? Department of Army, Department of Defense did a very large study on the effects of just leaving pallet on pallet water bottles out in the desert sun.
sure.
That our troops would drink for months and months and months.
Or
and
general
months.
warehousing and all this.
And the study had surprising results that there was no more leaching with bottles being left in full sunlight and cycling through daytime and nighttime temperatures in the desert for months and months and months versus when it arrived fresh. So at least that study, which was a very large, very comprehensive study, showed that the storage properties were pretty good actually. So it's a study by the government?
Albert.
Well, it also depends on
Albert can do the study.
Albert. Ella, were you going to ask a question? Yeah.
So, thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Ella.
What would you suggest when traveling? Hypothetically to some place where...
Like Nicaragua in a couple weeks?
From a stainless water bottle.
Yeah, so I actually talk about that in the book, and I have a whole section on bottled water, and I talk about how one of the times I feel like bottled water really is like a viable solution is when you are traveling and the risks to you are would greatly outweigh those of not having the bottled water. I mean, you could risk it and bring like a SteriPen and just try to use the little SteriPen that uses UV light to sterilize your water. I've never dabbled with that too much when I'm traveling. I usually drink bottled water and do my best to get rid of it while traveling. And I mentioned that, I think that's one of the times, in emergencies, when we have to bring water to someplace fast or traveling where the water isn't reliable, it's the 2 times I think bottled water is good. But otherwise, bottled water is 50% tap water about in the U.S. anyway. Eric.
You referenced countries. What are some of the countries that are tackling this issue, or are there any?
Yeah, so different countries are doing different things. Ireland, for instance, did a really big bag tax a long time ago and decreased their plastic bags by 90%. Even South Africa banned plastic bags after they became so predominant. A lot of cities in India have started to ban them because of those problems I talked about, like the flooding. China has moved that way. So, obviously we're starting to do some of the things. Some of the European Union countries have pretty strict laws on BPA and phthalates and banning those. So Canada has some. So yeah, people are doing it. Mm-hmm.
Good question. Yeah, you briefly spoke about substitutes for BPA.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a story that came out in the first special from Oxygen about it, about how some of those substitutes also contain estrogen synthetics. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so that's pretty. I couldn't find a ton, from the time I was writing this, it was pretty hard to find anything about that, but there is a little bit of research, and what it does suggest is that BPF and BPS, some of those substitutes are just as bad, if not have more endocrine disrupting properties than BPA. And it's pretty limited research. And BPA actually was used as as a hormone therapy when it was first came out, and a hormone in cattle. So in the 50s. So I mean, if that speaks to the fact that that's what it's supposed to do, I mean, you know, it obviously has those properties.
And just to see, if I had to clear the story, I might be mixing the story. The company who were making these BPA substitutes, did they also hire Philip Morris, I believe, who was saying, PR company that said that smoking cigarettes wasn't bad?
I think, so Nick Kristof in the New York Times had a story, and I think maybe this is what you're talking about, where he like linked like kind of paralleled the defense mechanisms that some of these companies are using with regards to some of these chemicals to like the same techniques that the companies and like the big tobacco companies used. And I think that's maybe what you're talking about, but I can't specifically say if that's what you're getting at.
Do you talk about compostables at all in your book?
Yeah, I do talk about that a little bit, and just sort of what that really means and how compostables are, and maybe not so very a lot of the time, and like talk about which the compostables you want to look for and what standard they have labeled on them, and yeah, and I talk about bioplastics a bit too as well. Yeah. Anyone else? Dave. I totally forgot to repeat the questions. I just realized that.
I was curious, when I was thinking about like hiking and stuff, enjoy using camelbacks.
Yeah.
How is, I haven't really thought about that.
Yeah. I use bladders all the time. I have a BPA-free one, but like we said, BPA-free, what's that mean? I guess I just chalk that one up to I'd rather run with a camelback than run with a stainless steel bottle on my back. take the risk on that one. Bassett, what do you think? This is my buddy Bassett. He runs a lot of ultramarathons. He can probably tell you here.
I agree.
So like I said, like, you know, plastic has its conveniences. You try to limit it where you can, but it's greatly beneficial to our lives. We all use it every day, right?
With the research that you've done, and speaking of the medical field, and the amount of waste that I think we all see in the medical field, did you come across them making efforts to improve their amount of waste? Or did you take that right?
No, I didn't. And I sort of, you know, like my take on it was sort of that when it comes to medicine, you use a lot of plastics because they're disposable, because you don't want things hanging around with chemicals on them, or not chemicals, but you don't want to spread infectious disease. So the disposable nature in medicine, I guess I just took it to be that way. Like that's why we use plastics in medicine a lot, because they are disposable, and that way you can reuse new things that are sterile and without sterilizing them quickly. And yeah, that's my take on it, I guess. And I could be wrong, but that's the way I understood it. Yeah, so I guess the easiest things, I mean, you know, if you wanted to do something for yourself, maybe don't take receipts as much, right? If you wanted to do something for your kids or your friend, like, you know, maybe start thinking about using glass bottles for children and things like that. If you wanted to do something for the environment, like the easiest things you can do that are quite, you know, or just bring your reusable grocery bags and bring a reusable coffee cup and get a stainless steel water bottle. I mean, those are pretty, they seem like really trivial, but when you add up the amount of plastic that we do produce and the things that get tossed every day, it's so staggering that, you know, if everyone was doing those things, it would make a big difference. So I guess those are the things.
One quick question. I understand the impacts on plastic bags on the environment. On a personal level, are they high in phthalates or?
No, typically they're plastic 1 or 2, and that's pretty.
So like a baby camera bags?
Yeah, I think those are plastic number 2, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. After the questions, we're going to have a signing. So Michael's just going to sit back here. If we could line up a certain way, that'd be great, since we have the camera and we don't want to rush him anyway. We're going to actually line up back around by mystery, science fiction, and then it'll start right here. So just line up like that.
Can I borrow a pen?
Yes.
Yeah, Hank?
A lot of what's been discussed is contamination, or the relationship between plastic and water, plastic in our food.
But in traveling to many developing countries, there's dump piles that are constantly burning all the time, and those the burned plastic aerosols.
Yeah.
And you just, in some places with inversions, it just sits there and
Oh.
bakes us.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so, did you address what the post-cursors are?
Yeah.
From burning?
I do talk about, yeah, I talk about the off-gassing of plastics just simply in our home, things like shower curtains and the getting into the air, as well as like the environmental effects of burning plastic and recycling plastic, where you have like people sorting through plastics. And like, it's common, plastics are really hard to recycle because they have very similar properties. Like, they don't have magnetic properties to differentiate them. Any plastic can be any color, so it makes them hard. So like, you go to these developing nations and people will sit there and they'll burn plastics and smell them to see what kind of plastic it is, to try to separate them. And then, you know, burning of trash with plastic in it. Yeah, so I talked a lot about these things as well. Yeah. And it's all very, it's not so great.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.